I believe very strongly, and I believe this will age well, that GLP-1s are going to be a moment in history where we see a culture shift due to a medical intervention, not unlike the birth control pill. It doesn't get more processed than protein powders. If we can get the average person to just do 2 structured workouts a week for the rest of their life, like, we won. Mm-hmm. We've done a phenomenal job. That's amazing.
I want to kick off the podcast by actually addressing the myth of the excessive cardio and cutting calories in order to lose weight. And I know that I'm starting to hope that a lot of people understand that this is in fact a myth and it doesn't work. But for anyone who may be in that loop, explain why this is something that doesn't necessarily work and that there's a better way. Yeah, now to be clear, it's rooted in definitely some truth, right? If you're looking to lose weight, you have to take in less energy than you're burning. So this is a law of thermodynamics. But what we tend to miss is the energy output side of the equation and how we can affect our bodies in positive ways to improve that so that we don't have to take in so little calories in order to lose weight. Because what tends to happen when people approach this in this wrong way, for lack of a better term, is they cut their calories and they dramatically increase their energy expenditure by moving a lot, which quickly leads to plateau. And so then you're stuck in this position where you're eating very little, you're moving a lot, and you're stuck. Like, you got some progress initially, but now your body's essentially adapted, right? And the body does this very effectively. And so you're stuck in this position, you don't know what to do, you get disheartened, and then you bounce out of it. What you want to do, at least what's a more sustainable, effective approach, is to positively affect your metabolic rate, build muscle, strength, feed your body what it needs, and set yourself up with a really, really good base of a metabolic rate so that then when you cut your calories, I should say, you're now eating more and you're able to continue to lose weight. And by the way, it's a very powerful effect that if you don't take seriously, you will hit this, and I'm sure people watching and listening have experienced this. Even people using GLP-1s, for example. I worked with a group of 50 people recently, and there were people on there that lost significant weight and then plateaued with 20 or 30 pounds left, and they were eating like 900 calories or 1,000 a day. And so, like, what's the solution? Like, up my dose, cut my calories even more? That's not a very good solution. So with those people, even I had to what's called reverse diet them, feed the body a little more, strength train, get that metabolic rate to move in a more advantageous position, and then try cutting again. And we were able to break through those plateaus. But building the body, building strength, feeding it appropriately, a high protein diet, that sets you up for long-term sustainable success, far better than the old just going to restrict myself and then just move as much as I can approach. So then talk to us about the impact of strength training and really trying to build that muscle up. Like, why is that so effective when it comes to your metabolism? Yeah, so this is a really good conversation because you get the science people in the fitness space, which sometimes can really frustrate me because they'll take data and they'll ignore the experience that a lot of people have, and they'll say things like a pound of muscle, according to data, will only burn an extra 10 calories a day. So, okay, build 10 pounds of muscle, you're going to burn 100 extra calories or 500 extra calories or 50 extra calories. That's not much. But that doesn't really explain the full picture. Human or mammalian metabolism is extremely complex, one of the most complex things that we've observed. And building muscle does speed up the metabolism through having more lean tissue, but there are other mechanisms that there's an interplay of mechanisms that we aren't fully aware of that can move your metabolic rate into a more or less efficient, for lack of a better term, position. In other words, you could take somebody with the same lean body mass and through outside stimulus, strength training, changing their diet, you can get their bodies to burn more calories on their own, even without more lean body mass. And so coaches and trainers who've done this for decades will tell you, I train people, they'll add 5 pounds of muscle. They were consuming really low calories before, and now they're eating 800 more calories a day, and they're burning body fat. And that extra 5 pounds of muscle doesn't fully explain it. So it might have to do with insulin sensitivity. It might have to do with hormone efficiency. It might have to do with energy conservation versus, not being so efficient with energy, maybe through heat production. There's a lot of different ways we can speculate, but coaches and trainers have observed this for years. Like, you strength train, you feed yourself appropriately, you can get to the point where your body burns far more calories than it did before. And it's not
you don't necessarily have to build all this incredible muscle. I mean, 5 pounds of muscle isn't a lot. You'll feel more sculpted. You'll feel more, tight and toned, or you'll have more shape. But if you do it in the right way, you'll find yourself burning 400 or 500 more calories a day, typically is what you experience. So that process is a more sustainable one. And it also, and this I can't overstate this, requires less work. So because I coached and trained people for so long, one of the things you have to weigh out when you train people, you got the science and the data, you got, okay, this is what it says, and then this is what it says works best, but also what works best in the real world? What's easiest to maintain? What's easiest to do? What are people going to do, right? Like if I read a study that says that jumping in a cold lake at 4 a.m., increases fat oxidation 15%, like I don't care, because who's going to jump into a cold lake at 4 a.m., right? So I have to look and see what actually works. Strength training gives you a lot in return for the output. Like 2 days a week of strength training. In fact, the study, I just quoted the study on my podcast. The study examined how much strength training is required to build muscle in experienced individuals. So this wasn't even talking about totally deconditioned people. Like if you're deconditioned, very little is required to cause your body to start building strength and muscle.
Yeah, the beginner gains are the best.
Oh, it's incredible. Like in fact, there was a study that showed that like deconditioned individuals doing one isometric contraction a week saw 20% gains over several week period. So, but these were experienced individuals. So these are people that are working out. How little can they get away with to build muscle? And it turns out 1 set per body part twice a week. That's it. So 2 full body workouts, 1 set. So you're going into the gym, let's say you do 5 exercises, 1 set, 1 set, 1 set, 1 set, 1 set, you're out twice a week for experienced individuals, showed muscle gain. Now, probably doing a little more would have resulted in more results. But what I'm trying to illustrate here is that you don't need a ton of strength training to elicit the positive response. Now, how valuable is that? I think it's incredibly valuable because most people aren't going to become fitness fanatics. Most people will use exercise as a way to improve the quality of life. It's not going to become their life. Like most people aren't going to be me and work in the space. So strength training is just this incredible tool that you can use that gives you this huge return. And for people who are like, I want to be able to work out and see some results and feel good, and I'm just getting started, like what's the best first place to start? That's a great place to start. That's not to say other forms of exercise don't have value, but if you had to pick one, especially for aesthetic purposes, fat loss, strength training is just great.
I honestly couldn't agree more. Like I've done everything, and when I started strength training, this was years ago, I feel like it changed my body. Like, and obviously like the mental health benefits and just like the confidence that you feel as a woman to be able to, it gives you like a sense of, and like it gives you a sense of independence that I don't need anyone to like lift heavy things for me, or like it just does something to you. And from like an aesthetic standpoint as well, I mean, what it did for my body and just the results that I saw was incredible. Now, of course, like, yes, like I pair it with other things, but I think that you can really get away with just strength training a few times a week and you're still good.
You are. And again, there's ideal, but let's not make ideal the enemy of what works and what's good as well. And you're 100% right. So, and my goal has always been to get the average person to develop a long-lasting relationship with exercise where they're consistent, it gives them great returns, and they enjoy it. And the truth is, and this is just like a fact, and this is what I've experienced. Again, gym managers will tell you this, trainers will tell you this. If we can get the average person to just do 2 structured workouts a week for the rest of their life, like we won. We've done a phenomenal job. That's amazing. You should be active every day. You should go on walks. But just 2 structured workouts a week will give you great returns, especially if it's strength training. And you're talking about changing your body. It's the only form of exercise where I can get as close to being a sculptor as I can get. Like with other forms of exercise, your body, will become more fit. But with strength training, I can say, I want to develop this area more. I want more roundness here. I want more fullness here. I want this to lift a little bit. And I can do targeted and specific exercises for that. And then you mentioned the confidence that it gives you. When I first became a trainer a long time ago, I remember my female clients would come in and say, I feel so much more secure in my body. I feel so much more confident. And I didn't get this as a man, right? As a young man, I didn't get this because I didn't have those experiences. But I would keep hearing it over and over again. And I've told this story many times. I had a client, She was an executive, very petite woman, 5'2", 120 pounds. And we started strength training, and she used to go on these business trips. And she came back from one after I had trained her for about 6 months. And she came in, she was so excited. She goes, Sal, I can't tell you how good I feel. I said, what do you mean? She goes, I put my baggage in the overhead compartment by myself. And it never occurred to me because I never had to ask somebody for help to do that. And she's like, I feel so strong and independent. I feel so good. I think strength training has been communicated so wrong for so long that women are either afraid of it, don't realize its value, and that's so terrible. Especially as a woman who wants to become fit, you will fall in love with it if you do it right and give it a chance. And don't be afraid of it. You're not going to wake up tomorrow looking like a bodybuilder.
Yeah, okay. We need to talk about that because I feel like any fear surrounding strength training comes from that like people think that they're going to wake up tomorrow and become Arnold Schwarzenegger. And I'm just like, do you know how, like, I couldn't do that if I tried.
No.
Like, it's insane. So can you talk a little bit about that and how unlikely that is?
It's extremely unlikely. The genetics required to build the kind of muscle where you look like freaky are so rare. They're as rare as the genetics that come with being 7 feet tall. So if I were to ask you, how many times in your life have you ever seen someone in the real world, not at an NBA game, just in the real world, that was 7 foot tall? Either never or like once or twice. Like you remember it, like, oh my God, that's a giant. That's how rare those genetics are for building muscle in both men and women. Of course, men are typically more on one side than the other. But if you have those genetics, you know already. Okay, so if you're listening right now and you're always the buffest, strongest person in the room ever since you were little, okay, you might have those genetics. Otherwise, no, it's not going to happen. And not to mention the people that represent that on social media that look that way, they have those genetics, plus they use performance-enhancing drugs. So they're on, male hormones. Women, most women, 99.9% of women, they could lift weights like a bodybuilder for 15 years. And what they'll accomplish is a very sculpted shaped body. They're not going to get massive. And even with the people that do have those genetics, great, you're going to get results really fast, and then you can do very little to maintain them. So it's really like win-win for everybody.
Totally. Okay, so I want to talk about someone who has been working out for a few years now, and they're wanting to get more into strength training and actually see results. How often are you recommending that they strength train? And do you just do that in the week, or do you pair it with something else? What are your thoughts?
So it depends on what you're doing on top of it. Like if you're like, hey, I'm running 5 miles every day, how much strength training should I do? I'll probably have you reduce your running and add a little bit of strength training. But if you're just getting started, 1 day a week of full body will take you pretty far. You'll probably progress relatively consistently for about a year or two with just 1 day a week. Now, what that's going to look like is you're going to progressively get stronger. You're going to be able to do more challenging exercises. So the workout itself will change as you get stronger. But you'll progress pretty consistently for at least a year or two, and then you can add another day a week. And then that'll last you for a while until you need to maybe add a third day. The other approach, which I like a lot, I really like this approach, is a 1 or 2 exercises a day approach. Now I like this because what you find with human behavior is that when people do a little bit of something every single day, it tends to become a habit faster than if someone does like one 45-minute or hour workout once or twice a week, right? So for a lot of people, I'll say if you have quick access to a gym, like it's in your garage or your basement or you're close to one, walk in, do 1 or 2 exercises a day. That's it. So today I'm going to go in and do 3 sets of squats, 2 sets of overhead press. And then tomorrow I'm going to go in and do, 2 sets of rows and, 1 set of, bench press. And so go in and do like 1 or 2 exercises a day is a great long-term approach. And again, that'll naturally progress as you get stronger, but you don't need a lot. That's one of the hallmarks and beauties of strength training is you just don't need a lot. Now, the reason why you see people do much more than that, well, first off, the more advanced you get, the more you need to continue to propel yourself. The first 2 or 3 years, you just don't need enough. Once after 2 or 3 years, then you'll start to need to really squeeze out that extra 15% or whatever. But the other reason is people who really like working out, and there's those of us that do, we tend to veer away from what's optimal and more towards what we can tolerate. So if you look at like the average fitness fanatics workout, it's not what's optimal, it's what they can handle. and I tend to do this, right? I tend to go to the gym and, this feels good. I'm gonna do a little more. And next week I'm gonna do a little more. And I teeter on overdoing it. And so I go to what I can tolerate, which is not what's optimal. What's optimal is less than that. And so optimal will give you best results. Tolerable will give you less results, but if you love spending time in the gym, then go for it.
Really? That's so interesting that you say what you can tolerate will give you less results than what's optimal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because you're always playing a game of recovery and adaptation is always what you're balancing, right? So when you go to the gym, you're stressing your body. This is why your body gets stronger or builds endurance or whatever. It's aiming to become more resilient to the same insult next time. Mm-hmm. Okay, so a simple example would be I did 10 push-ups today, and in 5 days I try again and I can do 11, right? So what happened was my body adapted to that stress of 10 push-ups, and it gave me a little bit more strength. So if I did 10 push-ups again, it's easier. It's not as damaging or not as stressful. So then of course I do an extra one and I keep that ball moving forward. There's a recovery process that happens from the stress, but there's also an adaptation process that happens, and there's some crossover. So to further illustrate that or explain it better, if I were to rub my skin with a rough, like some sandpaper, I would end up breaking down some of the surface level of my skin. And what would happen first is my body would heal that skin. So I'd replace what I rubbed off, but then it would add an extra layer or two to strengthen it a bit. And if I did this over time, I'd develop a callus, okay? So you have recovery or healing, and then you have adaptation. If you push too far or go too hard, you start tapping into or you start moving away from adaptation because all your body can deal with is healing and recovery. What this looks like for many fitness fanatics is I go to the gym, I get sore, I heal. I go to the gym, I get sore, I heal. Meanwhile, I make no improvements. I don't get any stronger. I don't see anything change. I'm just breaking things down and healing. And so what we tend to do when we love working out is we move more towards that and away from what's optimal. Optimal is the right dose that's going to maximize adaptation. So what's going to maximize the adaptation process. Mm-hmm. But the further I push myself, the more resources and ability I take away from adaptation, and the more my body needs to work on or focus on healing.
Okay, this is really interesting, and I actually want your opinion because so I strength train 3 days a week, and I feel like, I mean, I'm not hitting the same things all 3 days, right? But there's some overlap. But I do give it a break in between my days. But on my because I can't just go to the gym 3 days a week. That's like it's like, you know, I feel like I need it for my brain.
Yeah.
So
and that's real, by the way. Mental effects.
It's a real thing.
Absolutely.
Like, listen, I'm like at my desk. I mean, I take walking meetings, but you know what I mean? Like, I feel like it like ends my day, and I'm like, oh, like this is. I needed this.
100%.
So on the days that I'm not strength training, I try to recover by doing like super light cardio. And I feel like it just gets the blood into the muscles and it helps with the recovery. Like, is there... Like,
movement, yes. Movement can facilitate recovery and adaptation as well, so long as it's not too intense.
Yeah.
And you said something that can't be overstated. The mental health effects or benefits of exercise, if we were to bottle it, it would be the most effective antidepressant anxiolytic that existed. It's so effective at positively impacting our mental health that almost nothing comes close to it. So daily movement, daily exercise, so long as it's appropriate, is incredible for mental health. Now, it can go too far, especially if you start to develop a relationship with it that isn't balanced or healthy, where it becomes about really just trying to look good all the time or beat myself up because I use it as a form of punishment or restrict myself. And then it can move in the opposite direction. But done properly, there's almost nothing. I mean, one of the best ways to get yourself to feel better would be to move a few times a day. You test this out yourself. Like if you have a desk job, get up 3 or 4 times and go for just a 10-minute walk and see what it does to your creativity and your mental state.
I mean, there have been literal studies that have proven that you are much more productive and much more creative and just better at your work if you are getting up and going for walks versus sitting at your desk all day long. Like, this is like, I feel like it has, if I sit at my desk all day long, my quality of work is not good.
Yes. Yeah. So there's our internal self communicates to our external self, but our external self also communicates to our internal. So if I'm not moving all day long, the message my mind, my brain is getting is I'm probably sick. Something's wrong with me, and it starts to reflect that. If I get up and move, it gets the message that okay, we're feeling good. Let's produce a little bit more energy. I mean, I don't think we need to really push this message. I think everybody has experienced this.
Totally.
Now the challenge is when you're feeling crappy, the last thing you want to do is get up and move. But it's exactly what you need to do. Just like when you're feeling sometimes anxious, the last thing you want to do is be around people, but sometimes it's exactly what you need.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Okay, so outside of strength training, I mean, we got into like the movement piece throughout the day. Like if someone does want to improve their health or lose weight, what are some other easy things that you recommend?
So if you just wanted, like, what's a good general health, general stay lean, look good routine for most people, and we can talk about diet afterwards because that's a big part of it, but it would look like this. You would strength train 2 days a week, full body, and you would walk after each meal, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And that would be all of your activity. Now, could you do more to improve your fitness more, to perform better, whatever? Yes. But if you just did that in combination with a good diet, which we get to, you're going to look good. You're going to look very good, and your body's going to progress, and you're going to get shape, and you're going to be great. And it's not hard. It's not hard to maintain. 2 days a week in the gym, 45 minutes, walks after meals. It's not hard to sustain and maintain that. It's not a big commitment.
Tell us why the walks after meals is so important, because I feel like I can go on and on about it, but like you need to tell us.
Yeah, so really the benefits of movement post-prandial is what they call it, right? After meals, is for the insulin sensitizing effects. So when you eat food, your blood sugar goes up, contracting and relaxing muscles, essentially, this is an analogy I like to use, it's more complex than this, but it's like it's sucking up that sugar into the muscles. Your muscles become more sensitive to insulin, and my blood sugar becomes more stable. I don't get those ups and downs of blood sugar, which, okay, well, why don't I want that? Well, aside from longevity, and people will talk about metabolic health and all stuff, you know what it feels like to have ups and downs of blood sugar? It feels like anxiety, irritability. It feels like I'm down, I'm up, I'm wired. I got cravings. I'm craving more food. Like, what's wrong with me? Having stable blood sugar leads to stable, positive outlook. Why is that important? Well, besides feeling better, because I'm sure everybody would want that, how you feel it's the strongest influencer on how you decide to eat and how you decide to move and the interactions you have. It makes you a better person, and it contributes to better choices. If I have these highs and lows of blood sugar, I'm more likely to eat in a way that's unhealthy. I'm more likely to choose foods that are hyper palatable, maybe higher in sugar. I'm less likely to want to get up and move when I have those crashes. I'm less likely to want to be around people because I feel kind of anxious. So walking after meals it's funny. I have a friend of mine, Dr. Seeds. He's an expert in the peptide hormone space, but he's a health span. He would call himself expert. And when we talk about this, he said, he goes, if people just walked after meals, he's like, we would solve a majority of type 2 diabetes issues. It's so powerful that 10-minute walk after breakfast, lunch, and dinner is probably better for your health than a 1-hour walk done on its own. In other words, 30 minutes a day of walking done after breakfast, lunch, and dinner, 10 minutes apiece, is probably better for your overall health than 1 hour, twice as much done separately, because it's done postprandial.
That's insane.
It's incredibly beneficial. I mean, there was a study that came out a few years ago where they had people eat. They didn't even get up and walk. They did heel raises. So they stay seated and they just lift their heels and flex their calves. And you saw a significant reduction in blood sugar and improvement in insulin just from doing that. So, I mean, walking's better than that. Now, you're going to get some science fitness experts who are going to say something like, the more intense the workout, the more effective this is. So what you should do is like an intense 5-minute workout after meals.
No, like, who has time for that?
Nobody's going to do that. Like I said, my experiences in training everyday people, I'm not going to communicate something that people aren't going to do. So, I mean, you can do a 5-minute HIIT workout after breakfast, lunch, and dinner, but
okay, but also if you do that, you're going to throw out.
You're not gonna
so
feel
like
good.
What? Like
Stupid.
No, thank you.
I would never advise that.
Yeah, no, I'm okay without that. Yeah. Okay, so I know that you are a huge proponent of protein intake for women.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about that. What is the right amount of protein to consume, and what are your thoughts on getting it from food sources versus a protein shake or a smoothie?
Yeah, good question. So, there's an individual variant. I want to say this first, right? So I'm speaking generally. There are individuals who are going to have a different experience, and I've worked with enough people to see the spectrum of this. Okay, so I'm smart enough to know, or experienced enough to know, that what I'm about to say is going to work for most people, but some people are going to have a different experience.
Totally.
Okay. That being said, there's essential protein. In other words, there's like eating enough protein to be okay. And then there's optimal based off of what we see on the data in terms of fat loss, muscle gain, and appetite satiety or appetite control. And that number, that upper limit of optimal results you'll get from protein, I use a general number. The data is, there's a little bit of a range, but I use a general number. It's about 1 gram of protein per pound of, I like to use target body weight, because if someone wants to lose weight, I'll tell them to use their target body weight. So if you're a woman and you want to weigh 130 pounds, aim for 130 grams a day. If you want to weigh 150 pounds, 150 grams of protein a day. That's going to cover the bases. Now, what that's going to provide you with is a louder or more effective muscle building signal. You're going to build more muscle with the same workouts, significantly more. You're going to recover faster. You're going to burn more body fat, even with the same caloric intake. So when we look at the studies on diets that are comparable, same calories, but one's high protein, one is not, the higher protein diet tends to result in more fat loss, less muscle loss or muscle gain, okay? So it's better for fat loss, it's better for muscle gain. It's also, especially in the first few years of doing this, it's especially effective for appetite control or satiety. So now when I communicate this, people are like, well, I eat a high protein diet. I have 2 eggs for breakfast and I have, okay, eating 130 grams of protein a day, that's like 40 something grams of protein for breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
It's not 2 eggs.
No, 2 eggs is 12, okay? So it's a lot. So, and eat it first. Eat the protein first, prioritize that, then eat everything else. And what you'll find is your calories will naturally fall into a nice range, because it really does help with appetite. It also helps control blood sugar. So when you eat a high protein breakfast, regardless of what you eat the rest of the day, you see a more balanced effect on blood sugar from a high protein breakfast. But eat it first, and especially if you combine it with strength training or any workout for that matter. Now, to the question of whole food sources versus smoothies and powders. So I'm sure you've heard, heavily processed foods, not as ideal, whole natural foods. Okay. And people in my space hate it when I say this, but it doesn't get more processed than protein powders. It's a powder that tastes like strawberry shortcake or whatever. Like, it's extremely processed. Now you're getting the protein, and there are some benefits to protein powders. Okay, so I'll get to that in just a second. But it's not going to give you the satiety effects that whole foods will give you. 30 grams of protein from whole natural foods, even if it's just protein like chicken breast, is going to affect your appetite in a more powerful way than a 30-gram protein shake. So especially if fat loss is your goal, you want that. Now, if you're one of those people that struggles to get more calories and you need to eat more, then you might want to shake because it's not going to crush your appetite. Food also comes with lots of other nutrients and things that protein powders don't tend to come with. And it's food. Why not eat real food? Nonetheless, if at the end of the day, this is how I use protein powders for my clients and myself. At the end of the day, if you miss your protein targets, use it as a fill-in. So, today I hit 100 grams, I need 130, throw in your 30-gram protein shake. So it's just better in many other ways, but does it deliver high-quality protein? It does.
Smart. Okay, so one of the things that I really love about your podcast is that you guys were able to kind of take the topic of GLP-1s, which I knew as soon as it came out and it was starting to be used for weight loss, that this would be something that would change the world, honestly. Yeah. And I think it's really interesting seeing, like, I am a listener of your podcast, and obviously you guys were some of the first in the health and wellness space to kind of have a realistic approach to GLP-1s and how people can correctly use it. Yeah. So what are your thoughts? And actually, what are your thoughts on microdosing? Because I feel like that's something that I've seen come up a lot in the health and wellness kind of space as well.
Yeah, so this is a great topic. When we saw GLP-1s, what they did, their effectiveness, what we identified, and what we have essentially is the most powerful non-surgical medical intervention for weight loss that we've ever seen by far. Like nothing comes close to a GLP-1 that we've ever come up with, okay? It's extremely powerful. It's so powerful and effective from that standpoint. Now, I'm not saying it's a panacea, it's all perfect, it's all good. There's crazy nuance here we're going to get into. But it's so powerful and so effective that I believe very strongly, and I believe this will age well, that GLP-1s are going to be a moment in history where we see a culture shift due to a medical intervention, not unlike the birth control pill. Like, we can look back to the birth control pill and see how it changed culture in a particular way, good or bad. We're gonna see that with GLP-1s as well. That's how powerful and effective they are. Now, when we saw them as trainers, myself and my co-host, we had several meetings over this, and we sat down and we said, okay, we have to talk about this, and I want to make sure we communicate this in the right way, and I want to get ahead of it. I want to get ahead of it because with anything this effective, there's going to be potential for abuse. And what typically happens in our space is the anti or pro thing. Like, I'm all pro or I'm all against anything, which it's almost never the case. There's always nuance.
Always nuance.
So we looked at them. We examined the data. We had the best experts on our podcast to talk about. I mentioned one of them, Dr. Seeds. We talked about their experience. Some of these doctors had worked with people with GLP-1s for the last 10 or 15 years. So they have lots of experience working with them. And I think very strongly, I feel very strong. And then we also, let me back up, we also had a group of 50 people that we coached who were on GLP-1s, some of them on GLP-1s for years, some of them new, that we could coach because we also wanted to work with real people just to see, like, what pops up, what questions happen, what's it like to actually do this. And then my co-host Adam went on a GLP-1 on the recommended dose. He's not obese, but he did it specifically to say, I want to know what this feels like.
I thought that was so interesting, by the way.
Yeah,
I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, and it's like, I just want to know what this is like. And I'm not going to use my trainer brain to hack this. I'm just going to follow along like the average person because we want to be able to talk about this. I want to be able to talk about this in a way that's appropriate and accurate and responsible. And so what you have with GLP-1s are, if used properly, you have an incredible tool that I think, when you put it as part of a program or formula, can be extremely effective at helping a certain segment of the population. And here's what that segment looks like. When it comes to obesity, there is a segment of the population where, they have a lot of weight to lose, 70, 80 pounds plus. This has been a struggle for most of their life. Their relationship to food, their satiety signals are, to say the least, skewed and extremely challenging. Like, you're dealing with relationships to food like you would see with, like, an alcoholic with alcohol, where it's just eat less or just eat differently. Like, I really get upset when I see fitness professionals in my space have no compassion for this challenge because they didn't struggle with it. I've worked with people like this. I see it. I've worked with very disciplined individuals who struggle with this, and it's very, very challenging. And if you used, to illustrate this a little further, if you used some of the addictive symptoms of some of the relationships people have with food, if you use that and plugged it into the model of how we define addiction, you would see it fits in perfectly. So we're dealing with something very challenging. And so what do GLP-1s do, and how would I put this in a framework where I think this could be very beneficial? Well, I would take that individual who's really struggled most of their life, and I would say, okay, we're going to start you on a GLP-1. What the GLP-1 is going to do is it's going to dramatically reduce that pull that food has on you. It's going to really take away that grip. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to make sure you have a high protein diet. I'm going to make sure you strength train because your calories are going to drop significantly. What we don't want is the adaptation of muscle loss, which you'll see. By the way, GLP-1s don't cause muscle loss. It's just a dramatic reduction in calories, okay? So high protein, strength train. And then what we're going to do is, now that this pull and this grip on you is weakened, we're going to allow these neural connections you've developed over years to these behaviors start to weaken, which is what happens when you stop practicing a behavior. Like, you quit smoking and it was really hard at first, but then over the years it gets easier and easier as those neural connections weaken. And then what I'm going to do with you is I'm going to coach you, and I'm going to develop new behaviors, new habits around some of the reasons why you reached for food in the first place, whether it be stress, anxiety, boredom, circumstances, whatever, because that's what's happening. And so I'm going to develop other behaviors and I'm going to strengthen other neural networks. Essentially, what I'm going to do is I'm going to work with you and coach you through changing your relationship to food. And it's going to be easier because that grip on you is weakened. And what does that look like? That probably looks like a year or two, developing new behaviors, strength training, getting some weight off, developing a good relationship with food. And then we'll slowly come off and see how you do. And we'll have the GLP-1s in our back pocket if we do the backslide thing. And I think with that approach, we have a winning formula. I think we finally have a winning formula. Now, I do think that the potential for abuse is massive. Mm-hmm. We're already seeing this. We're seeing people who are like, I want to lose 10 pounds for summer. We're seeing stage competitors use it pre-contest. We're seeing people with body dysmorphia convincing their doctors they need to go on them so that they can starve themselves. We're also seeing people use these and do nothing else. There's that famous, she went viral recently, this young lady that went on a GLP-1, lost a bunch of weight, went to the doctor, and they're like, you have osteopenia now. And she's like, my bones are getting weaker, and she's blaming it on the GLP-1. But what happened was she just severely cut her calories because she had no appetite, did no strength training. When you do that, you lose muscle as your body adapts to the lower calories. And when you lose muscle, your bones get weaker. So I think this is a double-edged sword. But I think if we do it right, and this is what we've been really trying our hardest to communicate, we have a very powerful tool that I think we might be able to finally tackle this situation with good coaches and good trainers and doctors that work with them.
But I think also something important that you're saying is that when someone does go on these drugs, it's really important that they strength train and have the right amount of protein, because that is the thing, I guess, that does protect you against losing that muscle mass. Or, I mean, you will lose it, some of it, regardless, because you're having less calories, but it does protect you somewhat.
Oh, you can build muscle if you do it right through that process. So what happens when you take your calories from here to here, you were, let's say you were burning 2,000 calories a day. You go on a GLP-1, or you were consuming, let's say, 3,000 calories a day, so you're gaining weight. And then you go on a GLP-1 and you go down to 1,000. You're going to lose weight, and what your body's going to do is figure out how to burn 1,000 calories. Mm-hmm. It's going to try to match the energy intake, because otherwise you just lose weight until you died, right? So it's going to slow its metabolic rate down, for lack of a better term, to meet the new caloric intake. And one of the ways it does that is it pares muscle down. It gets rid of muscle, because muscle is very metabolically active. And so you'll lose muscle along with the body fat. Now, you can offset that significantly by keeping your protein intake high and giving your body a reason to have muscle, which is strength training. Strength training is the form of exercise that directly sends a signal to build muscle. So you do that with a high protein intake. Don't let your calories get too low. So work with your doctor if you have no appetite. Some people go on these GLP-1s like, it's like their first trimester of pregnancy, they can't eat at all or whatever, they feel nauseous. Like, lower the dose, go on an appropriate dose, strength train, eat your protein, and then what you'll see is fat loss. And maybe some muscle gain, or at least some muscle preservation. And look, I'm not just making this up. Like, we worked with a group of 50 people. I saw it firsthand. Within that group of 50 people, there were, off the top of my head, I think 5 or 6 people who had been on GLP-1s for 2 or 3 years. And they all had plateaued. So they all lost a lot of weight. Like, there was one woman who lost, I don't remember how much she lost, 60 or 70 pounds. And she had like 20 pounds to go. And she's like, I can't lose any more weight. What should I do? Should I up my dose? And we said, well, how many calories are you eating? Are you tracking your food? She goes, oh yeah, I've been tracking. And she was eating like 1,000 calories a day. I'm like, no, don't up your dose and eat less. We're going to go to 500 calories. Yeah, you're going to start reaching nutrient deficiencies, and you're going to feel terrible. She was already low energy. Yeah. So what we had to do with her was reverse diet her, had to increase her calories slowly. I had her strength training, trying to put muscle on, and then sure enough, we started to see some fat loss. But yeah, what you don't want is to trade one problem for the other. Totally. You don't want to lose body fat, but then also lose muscle strength, mobility, because that's also not healthy. That also isn't great for longevity. And if you look at the data, if you compare obese people to frail people actually have worse outcomes. So, people who are underweight have really bad outcomes. Mm-hmm. So definitely use these properly. And I implore coaches and trainers and health people and wellness experts, communicate this properly. Don't do the whole, like, it's all bad because it's pharmaceutical, because that's wrong. And also, these people are going to try them and be like, you're wrong. I used them and they worked. And you're going to push people away. Also, don't say, this is the solution, just do this. There is a approach and balanced way to using them in which I think we can get people to. The key is this. I'm not concerned with getting you to lose 30 pounds right now. I'm concerned with getting you to lose 30 pounds and keep it off forever. That's the problem.
Totally.
That's the issue. Losing 30 pounds is easy in the context of, I mean, you look at how many millions of Americans lose weight every year. A lot of them do. They all gain it back. So the real challenge is, how do we keep it off, or how do we be consistent, or how do we develop a relationship with these things, with exercise and eating healthy, that just sticks with you forever, regardless of the context of your life and all that. So that's the most important thing that we need to look at. So if I use a GLP-1 as part of a protocol to change your relationship to food, change your relationship to your body, change your relationship to exercise in a way that is healthier, and continue to solidify that, so that after a few years, like, how easy is it to eat healthy when you want to? How easy is it to exercise consistently when you enjoy doing it? That's what you want. That's what I want. That's what I want to get people to do.
So then we've obviously talked about this segment of people who have like a ton of weight to lose, right? But what about the segment of people who have the healthy habits? Okay, so they are going to the gym and they are eating well, and yet they're kind of like stuck, and say they don't have like the dramatic 60 pounds to lose, but say they want to lose 15 or 20. What are your thoughts there? Is it still appropriate to use it?
There's better peptides for that. If you want to go the peptide route and you got to lose 15 pounds, I mean, look at a growth hormone releasing peptide. That's going to raise your growth hormone, give you a little bit more muscle. It'll make your workouts a little bit more effective. There are more appropriate peptides for those individuals. You know, earlier you asked me about microdosing. This is where things get really interesting. So according to the experts I've had on my show, microdosing, based off of their experience, and there is some data to support this, okay, has some anti-inflammatory effects in the brain, and has some anti-autoimmune issue effects. So you're seeing people, and again, there's limited data on this. There is some data that points to this. This is based off of these doctors' experiences working with lots of patients. You're seeing people's psoriasis getting better, rheumatoid arthritis getting better. So that's interesting. That's very interesting to me. There's also, and here's where it gets really, and we're getting now into the speculatory weeds here, but there's massive anecdotes, lots and lots of anecdotes of people who are like, you know, I don't want to eat as much. I also don't want to smoke cigarettes as much.
I've heard that. I've actually heard that from a couple of my friends I know who've had issues with like alcohol or like, you know, substances essentially. And it's the same thing. They've reported the same thing. Yeah,
it may be acting on the hedonistic reward system of the brain, and it may be working with that in a way to where we seek less hedonistic, comforting behaviors that may not be as beneficial to us. So that I find fascinating, because now the applications could be, I mean, profound, right? Like, do we have something now we can use in combination with therapy to treat addiction? Maybe. And there's studies being done on this now, so this is speculatory up until as of the recording of this podcast. But I do know that they're looking at GLP-1s for this. Now, that also rings a little bit of an alarm bell to me, because the hedonistic reward systems of the brain are far-reaching, and I would be, I'm always, I'd be careful at toying with that too much, because that could cause, who knows what that could cause. Are you going to, in the long term, change your relationship to pleasure in ways that may be detrimental? I don't know. I'm not sure. Nonetheless, I think it's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, it's a really interesting area. Okay, I actually want to leave some time for audience questions because we got so many.
Cool.
Okay, so the first one that I have is, how do you stop late night cravings?
Oh boy. Late night cravings happen for a few different reasons in my experience. The first, I would say, is you're not eating enough protein or calories during the day. So you may be in too much of a caloric deficit, or you may not be consuming enough protein. And so your appetite's kicking up towards the end of the day. So if you're in an aggressive caloric cut, you're probably in too much of a cut and it's getting very challenging. And by the way, cravings, we know what those feel like. It's like this, really strong pull or whatever. So that's one reason. The second reason is the relationship you've developed with food. You might need to examine, become aware of, and work on. And that's a longer process. So what do I mean by that? Well, you might have an association with having something sweet at the end of the day, or an association with watching TV and eating, or anxiety or stress, or you may view it as a treat, like a literal treat, like I deserve this type of deal. Now, how do you get around that? Awareness, what does that look like? Well, it's a awkward process of, I want that treat, I crave that thing, take a notebook, I like paper, because it slows these things down, and write down how you feel. That's it. Just write down how you feel. And slowly over time, you'll start to identify what's going on. Now, it's awkward because it's like meditation. Like the first time you meditate, you're like, what am I doing? And then you're like, I'm going to fall asleep. But eventually you start to develop this skill. Over time, you start to identify these feelings, and then you can find other ways of satisfying that. But for most people, it's, let me look at your protein intake, let me look at your calories. It's too aggressive. And then lastly, a little bit of hunger is normal if you're in a deficit. If your body's burning body fat, it's going to send a signal to you that says eat more. So sometimes people are so uncomfortable with any hunger at all. They're like, oh my God, I don't know what to do. And so with those people, I reframe it. So these are clients I'd work with where I see that their deficit is appropriate, protein intake is good, we're doing the awareness exercises, and they're like, oh my God, this hunger. It's like, well, I think you need to get comfortable with hunger sometimes because it's a normal feeling. It would be like never feeling sad. Imagine if every time you were sad, you had to fight it. Like that becomes a drug addiction, right? So those are the main areas I would look.
Cool. What is an easy lifting routine for someone in their 30s wanting to get stronger?
Yeah, so if I were to put together a generic routine, it would be some kind of a squatting movement. So like either a barbell squat or a lunge. So some kind of a squatting movement, some kind of a pressing motion. So like a bench press or a machine press, some kind of a pulling movement, a row would be a good example, and something overhead. So you have 4 main exercises. And then I would throw in something that's maybe rotational or core related. And within those categories are variations of each of those. If you did that twice a week, you're going to do great. And if you treated those as skills, in other words, getting better at the movements rather than I'm working my back, I'm working my shoulders, I'm hammering my legs, then you're gonna do a better job.
I love that you bring that specifically up because I think it's really interesting when you go to the gym, like it's like an ego thing, like you want to lift heavier, right? But instead what I focused on with my trainer is like ass to the grass kind of squats, right? And oh my God, when I started to take that weight off, I was like, this is the worst. Okay. But then you get so much stronger. Yeah. It's insane. Like even I feel like I'm not as injury prone, like you're just able to like move through life like way better. Yeah. So you're right. Like I think like doing the movements better is like it's amazing.
I like to give like an analogy like this. Like if you look at an exercise, there's a value that you can attain from it that's like on a 1 to 10. Mm-hmm. And the 10 comes from doing it perfectly. The 1 comes from doing it absolutely terribly. Yeah. So the better you do it, the more return you're going to get from everything from the results to not hurting yourself to carry over to the real world. So treat exercises like skills. They are. Go to the gym and practice the lifts and get really good at them. They'll get way better results than if I go to the gym and think, I'm going to hammer my legs. I'm going to hammer my shoulders. No. I'm going to do an overhead press. I'm going to do a squat. And I'm going to get really good at it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, love that. Okay, so does the Muscle Mommy workout help strengthen the pelvic floor?
Yeah, there's some pelvic floor exercises in there. Uh-huh. So we created a program called Muscle Mommy, really targeting women who want to build muscle, who want to sculpt their body. And we organized the program in a way to really hit what women or female clients would tell us they want to focus on. Okay, so a little bit more glute focus, a little bit more shoulder focus, a little bit more back focus than some of the other body parts. And we did put in exercises for the core and the pelvic floor. Although I will say, if you're postpartum or you really have pelvic floor dysfunction, your best bet is to work with a specialist who can watch what you're doing and coach you through that.
Okay, so I guess this takes us to the next question, which is perfect. How do you recommend women to approach pregnancy at every trimester?
Oh, God, I love this. My 2 favorite demographics to work with were advanced age. Love training people in advanced age. The return was just so great. They're just the quality of life would change so much for them. And then pre, during, and post pregnancy was great. Partially because I love kids, so my clients, I end up meeting these babies afterwards. But also just that it posed this incredible challenge because of the physical and hormonal changes that you go through. So let's talk about before pregnancy. Get strong. That's going to protect you as you get into pregnancy and as your body changes and your muscle recruitment patterns start to change. Because your body changes, your core activation, your hips, because of the hormones and compounds that are released to loosen things up, and your pelvis, like all these things start to change. So you want to get strong first. That'll protect you, especially through the first trimester, which tends to be exemplified by lack of energy, nausea, I can't eat much. So you're going to go into that feeling good, feeling strong. First trimester, I don't want to work out. I can't work out that much. Oh my God, I feel like garbage. I remember my wife with our second child, she would like walk around with like a pot next to her all day because she would throw up in it often. So she's like, you can't eat much, can't work out much, but that muscle you built is going to buffer you and protect you a little bit, okay? Now, some women don't have that, which is great. First trimester, great. Work out like you have the whole time. Second trimester tends to be the honeymoon trimester. You feel good. Go ahead and work out. But if you start to show, okay, then the recruitment patterns are starting to change already in your core. So you want to avoid too many, forward flexion exercises and really focus more on stability and rotation. But all the other exercises are perfectly fine. But as we get towards the end of the second trimester, and especially the third trimester, we're going to avoid split stance exercises. The belly gets in the way. We're going to do more bilateral exercises, both feet on the floor. And third trimester, I'm going to avoid exercises where you're laying down. I'm not doing bench presses, but I'm doing presses, maybe sitting up on a chest press. Aside from that general advice, listen to your body. Listen to your body. A lot of mistakes are made when women are like, well, I was told to do this and I know it doesn't feel good, but I'm going to do it anyway. And then they feel horrible afterwards, or they end up injuring themselves. So if it feels awkward or weird or especially unstable, then don't do it and do something else. And then postpartum, when you're cleared for exercise, do less than you think. Do very little and ease your way back, because what happens, you have different recruitment patterns in your pelvic floor and in your core in particular. So back problems and hip problems are super high, even though you might look the same. Sometimes women are like, but I look the same. I feel, but I don't know what's going on. My back hurts all of a sudden, whatever. Your muscle recruitment patterns refer to how muscles recruit and work together. Well, when baby's growing, my abs, obliques, psoas muscles, my erector spinae, all of that has to change how it recruits and stabilizes. When I give birth, I get this sudden change in how I look, and some women, rarely, but some women look like they gave birth, but oh my God, I can't believe you just had a baby. They think I'm back to normal. No, those recruitment patterns are still there. So we have to train and strengthen your pelvic floor specifically. And you have to be very, very careful with core exercises and start to connect to muscles like the TVA, the transverse abdominis, so like where you draw in your stomach, that muscle that sucks in the midsection. Do stabilization exercises when you start to feel like you can draw things in. A plank is good, where you're maintaining a flat back, don't let your back arch. And then slowly move yourself into strength training exercises. And I'd say give yourself 60 days of really easy workouts before you start to judge whether or not you're scaling up, regardless of how you feel. Because sometimes when I'm like, I feel great, I'm going to go for it. Injuries start to become quite common right around here. And then lastly, and then this is like super understated, okay? Your sleep's probably going to be like crap. Your hormones are not the same, especially if you're breastfeeding. So give yourself a lot of grace. And don't think, and this is a terrible mistake, I can do everything. Like there's so much time and energy is being devoted to baby, especially with lack of sleep, that your body has maybe this much capacity for additional stress. So you're going to go to the gym and beat yourself up. You're going to put yourself in a really bad position. So be very gentle with yourself. Give yourself lots of grace. We have so many examples on social media of women that are like, 3 months later, I'm back to my normal self. That is not anywhere close to the average. And I've trained a lot of fit women. The vast majority of fit women that I trained didn't feel like themselves until like a year and a half later, sometimes 2 years later. That doesn't mean they weren't fit afterwards and they look healthy, but it wasn't until like a year and a half, 2 years later, we're like, oh my God, I feel like myself again.
Yeah.
So give yourself tons and tons of grace.
Sal, this has been amazing. Tell everyone where they can find you.
Thank you. Mind Pump is the podcast. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, and anywhere you can find podcasts.
Amazing. And I have to say, your podcast, I've already told you, it's one of my absolute favorites. I listen to it almost every day on my walks, and it's incredible. So everyone should go tune in.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.